China, 3rd century BC. After countless wars which killed half the population and left the rest starving, the empire is finally united. Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi decides to think about the security of his country and completely close its border with a giant wall. According to the official version, it was built against nomads from the north, but according to folk legends, it was built against creatures called northern demons that came with dust storms. But most likely, these are just tales thrown in by Hollywood to promote a shitty movie with Matt Damon. The reality was less fantastical and much harsher. Hundreds of thousands of forced laborers, soldiers, and convicts died during its construction. So many that their bodies were simply walled up inside the wall. In this video, I'll use chronicles, archaeology, and modern AI reconstruction techniques to show how the Great Wall was actually built. From the first stone to a structure half the length of the Earth's equator. 221 BC. China is just emerging from the Warring States period, more than a century of continuous conflict that devastated entire regions. The fields are neglected, the cities are exhausted, and the population has declined so much that in some areas half of the inhabitants have disappeared. Qin Shi Huangdi inherits not just a unified state, but a territory teetering on the brink of renewed disintegration. And the first major problem he faces lies not within the empire, but beyond its northern horizon. The steppe tribes, in particular the Yongnu, did not wage war according to the rules of the Chinese states. They did not storm capitals or wage protracted campaigns. They attacked quickly, took livestock, people, and grain and disappeared. It was difficult to use a traditional army against them because they did not stay in one place long enough. For an empire that had just built a centralized system of government, this meant constant instability along thousands of kilometers of border. The idea of fortifications was not new. Even before unification, individual kingdoms had built earthen ramparts to protect their northern territories, but these fortifications existed in isolation. Qin Shi Huangdi ordered them to be connected into a single line of defense and extended where necessary. Thus began a project that would gradually become the longest defensive system in history. Construction during the Qin period did not mean stone walls, which we see today in tourist photos. It was mainly compacted earth. The technology involved pouring layers of soil, clay, and gravel between wooden shields and compacting them to a state where the material became almost like concrete. In the dry climate of northern China, such a structure could stand for centuries. Some of these early sections have survived to this day. The scale of the work was unprecedented. Chronicles speak of hundreds of thousands of people involved at the same time. These were not only soldiers, but also convicts, debtors, and forcibly mobilized peasants. For many, this meant separation from their families for years, and sometimes for life. People were sent to distant sites where they worked in the mountains, deserts, and cold steppes. Materials were obtained locally. Stone was extracted from nearby quarries, and soil was taken directly from the hills, which were leveled. Wood was cut for formwork. In mountainous areas, all this had to be dragged uphill without sophisticated equipment. Each meter of wall required thousands of kilograms of material, which was carried by hand or on primitive stretchers. In the heat of summer and the cold of winter, mortality was high. There is a legend that the bodies of the dead were walled up directly into the wall. In addition to the physical difficulty, construction required strict discipline. The Qin dynasty is known for its harsh legal system. For breaking the rules or attempting to escape, not only the worker himself, but also his family could be punished. Now we can see how this worker is being led away from the general line of construction. He was late for his shift. According to Qin law, this was not a breach of discipline, but an undermining of state work. At best, he would receive additional years of forced labor. At worst, he would be branded, have his nose cut off, or be sent to the most difficult sections, where only a few survived. But don't worry, this time he was lucky, and it ended with just a warning. The construction of the wall was carried out in a military manner. The workers were divided into teams, each supervised by soldiers and officials. The norm of performance was measured by the volume of soil poured or the length of the compacted section. If a group did not meet the deadline, everyone was held responsible. This kept people in constant tension. They worked quickly, often exhausting themselves to the limit. Living conditions were minimalist even by the standards of the ancient world. The basis of the diet was millet or rice, depending on the region, sometimes salted vegetables and less often meat. Water was taken from the nearest springs or rivers, but in the steppe regions this was problematic, so some of the supplies had to be brought from afar. The diet was monotonous and did not cover the energy expenditure of daily physical labor. They slept in temporary camps near the work sites. These were earthen barracks or primitive shelters made of wood and fabric. In winter, the cold penetrated everywhere, and in summer, dust and insects. There was no medical care system. If a person was injured by a landslide or a fall from an embankment, they were either transferred to lighter work or simply replaced. The technology itself required constant precision. Wooden forms were installed in parallel. The space between them was filled with layers of soil 10 to 15 centimeters thick and carefully tamped down with wooden or stone hammers. In mountainous areas, the wall was built along ridges where the wind could literally knock people off their feet. But from a height, it was easier to see movement in the steppe. The line of fortifications was not straight. It followed the relief, choosing strategic points for towers. At this stage, the wall did not yet look like a monument. It was a continuous construction front that advanced kilometer by kilometer. After the death of Qin Shi Huang, the system began to falter. Excessive mobilization, taxes, and harsh laws caused a wave of uprisings, and the dynasty fell less than 20 years after unification. Part of the fortifications fell into disrepair. The earthen ramparts crumbled and the garrisons were emptied. But the idea itself did not disappear. 1,500 years later, another dynasty, the Ming, would rebuild the wall with stone and brick, turning it into a giant fortress. And it was then that a moment would come that would prove that even a wall more than 20,000 kilometers long could fall in a single day, if the enemy opened the gates from within. The Ming period, 14th to 17th centuries. By this time, most of the early earthen fortifications had either crumbled or lost their military significance. But the threat from the north had not disappeared. The Mongol hordes had already conquered China once and founded the Yuan dynasty. The Ming emperors remembered this very well. Therefore, instead of earthworks, they began to build stone and brick structures. What most tourists photograph today near Beijing is precisely from the Ming period, and so a full-fledged fortification system began to appear. The walls were up to 7 meters thick at the bottom and up to 8 to 9 meters high, with battlements, crenellations, loopholes and regular towers every 100 to 200 meters. Separate kilns were built right next to the construction sites to produce bricks. In some regions, archaeologists find stamps with the names of workshops and even the names of responsible officials. This means that if a section was destroyed, it was possible to find the culprit and punish him. The scope of the work was enormous. According to historians' estimates, hundreds of millions of bricks were produced for the construction and repair of the wall during the Ming period alone. If you laid them out in a single line, the length would be approximately fucking huge. And all this without industrial machinery, by hand, using draft animals and human power. In addition to the wall itself, fortresses, garrisons, and grain and weapon depots were built. In key passages such as Shanhai Pass, there were entire military towns where thousands of soldiers lived with their families. The wall functioned as a surveillance system. Soldiers stood guard on the towers, sending signals with smoke or fire. One column of smoke meant a small enemy detachment, 2 meant a larger one, 3 meant a massive attack, and 4. There was no such signal. In clear weather, the signal could be transmitted hundreds of kilometers in a day. And yet it was not an absolute barrier. Nomads learned to bypass weak sections, bribe border guards, or simply wait for the right moment. In the 15th century, Mongol forces even captured Emperor Ming during one of their campaigns. This came as a shock to the empire and led to a new phase of fortifying the wall. But the most significant moment occurred in 1644. Li Zicheng's rebels captured Beijing. General Ming Sangui, who controlled the Shanhai Pass, a strategic gate in the Great Wall, was faced with a choice: surrender to the rebels or seek help from the Manchus. He opened the gates to the Manchu army. Through this pass, they entered China and founded the Ming Dynasty. The walls stood. The garrisons were in place. The stone and brick had withstood the centuries. But one man's decision negated its strategic role. After the Qing established their rule, the wall gradually lost its significance. The empire now controlled the territories on both sides of the fortifications. Garrisons were reduced, sections fell into disrepair. Local residents dismantled some of the bricks to build houses. Today, we see only fragments of what was created over 2,000 years ago. If all known sections were put together, their length would exceed half of the Earth's equator. But the Great Wall is not a single project or a single era. It is a millennial attempt by the state to control space, movement, and fear. And as history has shown, length does not always matter.